One of the images you're looking at was made by Adobe Firefly, and the other one was made by a competitor. Choose your favorite. If you're anything like me, you pick the competitor, which does feel like a case against Adobe, but why are the competitor's images the one that everyone seems to like more? This is because there's fundamental differences in the training data in which both the engines are running off of. As you can see, Midjourney is being trained on images that are not licensed and have been sourced without permission throughout the internet, which means they're not safe to use for most creators, as being sued becomes a real risk. Yet when you look at Adobe, Firefly is trained on safe images since Adobe has a large breadth of images that they're able to use since they've already licensed them. It would take a large amount of licensing and thus a huge investment for these other AI image generation companies to be able to have pictures as they do now and ensure that they can be used without licensing headaches. Truly, it feels like the market is against Adobe in the midst of this AI transition. The market just can't know whether Adobe is going to be able to adapt into the long term. Yet, at least in the case of the AI images, the only thing that makes the images of the competitor better is the restricted data. So how valuable is the competitive advantage really? And much of Adobe's revenue is coming from big corporations, and if they decide to use AI tools, which one is going to be more valuable to them? The one that makes marginally better images with the risk of legal trouble and foiling their name, or the one that protects them from all of that? And even with Firefly's immense growth in monthly active users, their growth in annual recurring revenue, and their balance of 300 million in annual recurring revenue, Firefly is really more of a customer acquisition tool right now than anything else in the current landscape of the business. And if we really want to understand whether Aria is a good investment here, we're going to have to dig deeper. All of this matters for one of the most convincing valuations I've seen in a long time. The main reason for the very unfavorable valuation right now are three core ideas. First off, the departure of the CEO and the CFO. The CFO decided on June 8th, 2026 that he wanted to leave Adobe, and we figured out on June 11th, which suggests possible weakness in the business of Adobe. But if we look closer into what Dan Durn is leaving for, he's actually leaving to take a position at the CFO of Marvel Technologies, a semiconductor company. Well, the semiconductor company that Jensen Huang said was going to be the next trillion-dollar company. So a company which has much stronger sentiment around the business than Adobe. I mean, it makes sense he would want to hop ship at this point, and I don't think it suggests anything negative to do with Adobe, though I could see why analysts might fear his departure. But with many multi-decade Adobe execs in the lineup, I just really don't feel like we have much to worry about. But I've got less to say when it comes to Shantanu Narayan leaving after 20 years. I mean, that is shocking, but he has offered to stay on the board as the transition occurs. So while he is leaving, it's not like he's completely jumping ship. Additionally, analysts cite concerns with the growth of freemium offerings. Freemium offerings are those in which we provide without any costs to the consumer, and then we later try to upsell the consumer on more expensive plans later on. For us, it's being used as a customer acquisition tool. Analysts fear that we're giving up revenues and subscriptions by offering freemium, but I just don't really understand this in the context that one of the greatest concerns for the company is that they won't be able to grow into the newer audiences. Freemium should be that bridge into the newer audiences. So it appears that the market's really trying to pick and choose exactly what they want to hear from Adobe. So Adobe is offering a solution to one of the problems that the market is citing, and the market just can't hop on board because they expect certainty. The less certainty, the more the stock suffers. Though I do believe the final concern of the market is rational, the idea that AI could dynamically change the landscape that Adobe is playing in. Much of the change in the price of Adobe has come from a re-rating of the terminal value of the company. So if we don't know the market in which Adobe will be playing in 5 years from now, how can we say that the price in which Adobe should be trading is rational? When you're making an advertisement or a movie or a video, all that matters is how many people you can have watch or engage. Making this number as high as possible is going to be the primary goal. And as long as human-made ads and videos and movies, and truly anything else in the creative space, do better than their AI alternatives, companies and individuals are going to use human labor to create this content. It matters very deeply that someone has complete control over the element that they're editing, because a very slight change is essential to making the final product feel just right. I don't know if AI will end up changing this, and if it does, I don't know how long it will take, but what I do know is AI has been predicted to bring the end of the world time and time again, to take people's jobs, and yet over and over again, it seems that companies are regretting using AI to replace human creativity, and rather AI is something that should be used and supplement with humans in order to create a better final product. Enterprise customers with over 10 million in annual recurring revenue are growing greater than 20% year over year, meaning that we're either actively expanding relationships or making new ones in the space of these ultra big clients. These clients are deepening their relationship, and the most important idea is the stickiness of these big clients, which is going to matter the most in the valuation of Adobe, and Adobe being below intrinsic value in this scenario. Because of the current price to earnings that Adobe is trading at and the cash flows of Adobe, as long as the company grows at 0% into perpetuity, their intrinsic value is above what they're trading at, as I record. The stickiness of the Adobe ecosystem is exactly the biggest selling point of the investment. The implicit costs of switching software are massive, especially since Adobe Product Suite just stretches through every creative requirement you would ever need. And the larger the company, the larger the implicit costs. If you switch your employees off Adobe when you have hundreds or thousands of employees working with Adobe every day, each one of them has to relearn the new software, costing valuable time and money. So the larger the deals, the stickier they are. Many Adobe customers who are willing to pay for their software in the first place obviously put a lot of value into their creative efficiency, so they already put their time and effort of their creative initiatives to being as valuable as they're willing to pay. So when they start their subscription, they know that Illustrator, for example, is worth at least $23 per month to them. And as they use the software more and more, it becomes more and more valuable to them as they build the skills within the software. So the value of Illustrator becomes much more than the figure of how much they're paying per month. And we see that both of the businesses that Adobe operates in are extremely sticky, digital media and digital experience. So it appears rational that they would be able to keep these revenues at least flat over time, which may suggest a margin of safety. And yes, I do see this third business. I just assume it's not worth our time if it's 1% of revenue and declining. The digital media, which is the segment that contains Creative Cloud and Document Cloud, also known as Acrobat, has all of these characteristics, and once you start to use the services, it's really hard to change. But a huge problem has been identified for Adobe, which is the rise of competition in the form of CapCut, Canva, and DaVinci. But on the bottom line, it appears that the growth of these companies is not actually really hurting Adobe. The market in which all of these companies are operating in is growing quite fast. So while CapCut, Canva, and DaVinci might be better at capturing these new consumers, Adobe is still doing just fine at retaining consumers. One caveat here would be Canva, which has made an acquisition of Affinity, which actually has 95% of Fortune 500 companies using them, which means both Adobe and Canva are now competing for the same budget up here. But currently, I don't see a lot of signs that Adobe users are fleeing to Canva, and rather they're actually just using Canva offerings in conjunction with Adobe. And then when we consider digital experience along with digital media, the argument gets even more convincing. Digital media is reasonably sticky in the nature that implicit switching costs are quite high, but digital experience, the moat is about as deep as it gets. This is because you're a partner with Adobe through Adobe Experience Platform and then Adobe Experience Manager. And I'll try to explain them in the simplest possible terminology, but you're being provided with data that allows you to make more informed decisions about your strategies going forward. So if you switch from these platforms, you're losing out on all the data that you've built up with Adobe, which is worth so much more to each individual company. And we see that this portion of the company is sitting at 25% of the total revenue. And clearly clients are staying with Adobe and expanding the relationship here. In terms of financial analysis, so far this video has mainly just been some of my own observations from my research mixed with some ideas that I've seen online. We're going to get into the reason why I decided to buy the company overall, the tipping point, but if you're interested in any of the deeper financial analysis ideas in Adobe, you should go check out Aria's videos. I know he's got a larger platform than me, but I think he has really great ideas about the business, so he deserves all the attention he can get in the space of the Adobe investment. Also, make sure to subscribe if you want more rundowns like this. Alright, so at the beginning of the video, I said the main reason why the market is moving price down on Adobe are re-ratings of the terminal value of the company. Yet when I do a calculation of just the first 9 years of the business at very low and decelerating growth, we see that it makes up 52.2% of the valuation. And we see that in this valuation, when we include a flat terminal, meaning no growth into perpetuity, the company is worth $309 per share. But this means if we apply the weighting of the growth years taking up 52.2% of the valuation, we see the intrinsic value is $162 per share. And this isn't suggesting that there's no growth in the terminal years, but rather there aren't any terminal years. If there's no terminal years, the intrinsic value of the stock is just 13.5% lower than what the stock is trading at. In my opinion, the margin of safety is that in the worst of the worst scenarios for the company, my max loss is 13.5% in terms of intrinsic value. And because I think earnings can be roughly flat into the future, I do have a margin of safety in the traditional sense. Thank you for watching, and remember, if there's anything incorrect in my calculation of intrinsic value, the realities of what actually plays out may look very different. This is not investment advice. Assume everything you see to be opinion derived from facts that you should check. As always, good luck.